and Kathleen Bride.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Um, as we go along, when you have a question, just raise your hand. Um, I don't think we need to wait until everyone has a question and everybody is saying stop talking. So, Mary, you need to tell me what you want me to talk about to begin with, because I have some notes, but I don't know if they're really the thrust of this meeting.
Well, I think that a lot of people don't really understand what pedagogy is.
Uh-huh.
In the world of piano, you can get a degree in piano pedagogy. In harp, we don't really hear that very much. And I think what my main questions are what pieces can we use to teach certain techniques on the harp? That I find that very fascinating. What pieces and actually how to teach those pieces. I would like some ideas on how to teach those pieces. And if we could maybe start there, and then I'll find the rest of my notes.
Yeah, this is a really big subject. Pedagogy is basically how to learn how to teach. No one is born knowing how to teach, and we all have a tendency to teach the way we were taught, which is not always such a good thing. I think we have to make sure that we spread our wings a little bit, especially investigating repertoire. I find harpists teach the same thing that they learned over and over again. And it may not necessarily be what is best for this or that particular student. Every student is different. As we know, they all have different abilities. They have different hand sizes. They're small, large, heavy, not so heavy, skinny hands, fat hands, and with different learning styles. And so I think that we have to examine repertoire carefully. I always urge my students to go anywhere they can perhaps engage the music retailers. Go to an American Harp Society conference. Go to some of these regional meetings that are held, so that there's bound to be one or two retailers, and I say to them, stand in front of the stacks of music and start taking a look. I give them a criteria. It's very vague. Is this going to work for any of your students? How do you know it's going to work? Is it very right-handed? Does it have a minimal left hand? Is there any way you can improve on this? They have to develop a sense of looking at music and seeing if they think it will work. I am a great devotee of starting students on the Lucian Thompson books, the beginners, because Thompson, whom I knew very well, my parents rented a harp from him for me when I was 10 or 11 years old. He kind of turned the world upside down in publishing harp music, because number one, he made a lifetime of teaching youngsters. He had some adult students, but he taught an awful lot of youngsters into teenage years. If you look at his first book, and I use it in my pedagogy class, and I have just now blanked out on its name, Beginning at the Harp, volume 1, you will see that the very first piece, the first note you play is F above middle C. Now, pretty much every harp book you look at these days starts on middle C. Why? We just think, oh, well, it's the middle of the harp and it's red and everybody will recognize it. But we have to understand that the concept of lines and spaces, which we are most of the time teaching because kids come without reading skills, F is fine because it's rock solid, right in the first space. You can't get around it. It's got a line below it and a line above it. he could have started on E, but that doesn't give him a lot of places to go. So he started on F, realizing that starting on middle C meant that that was a ledger line. Youngsters don't understand the concept of a ledger line. There's E, and then there's a space, and then there's another note that has a line through it. What is that? And you'll see a look of consternation on the face of the 7-year-old who's trying to figure out what it is you're talking about when you talk about ledger lines. So he insisted on not only starting that way, but also starting a youngster who had no experience, or maybe had studied a couple of lessons with somebody, or maybe played the piano, remembering that as a pianist, you use your hands this way. As a harpist, we use our hands this way, yeah? So everything is completely different. He's a big devotee of using an anchor finger, so that if you are starting this harpist, second finger, right hand, second finger, eventually left hand, but the thumb is on, you have an anchor so that you can hang on with that thumb and you play the second finger and you get a good articulation into the palm and you make a good sound to begin with. You can do the same thing in the left hand. He has the first couple of pieces for right hand and the next couple of pieces for left hand, and then eventually he puts them together. And then I always say to my students, if you think any book, beginning harp book, I don't care who has written it, if you think that that is going to take you through all of your lessons with your beginner, you're mistaken, because no book is complete. It can't be. And so I always say to my students, you're going to get real good at writing your own pieces so that you tailor a piece to little Susie who comes at 3 o'clock, and little Janie who comes at 3:30, and little Doris who comes at 4 o'clock. They're not the same people, so they're going to need slightly different pieces. So I like to influence, hopefully, my students into jumping around in books, taking the best of them and writing their own pieces. That way they can spend a little more time than any book will allow them, a little more time making sure that the 2 is played correctly, and then eventually the 1 is played correctly, and then eventually 1, 2, or 2, 1. Saying to them, we've just talked about this, what's harder, 2, 1 or 1, 2? And they all said, oh, 1, 2. No. 1 going toward the column, 2. You're working with gravity. And so it's very easy for a child to do that when they get to that skill. They can see how the hand is operating. 2, 1 is much more difficult because they can't quite see what's going on with the second finger. I'm doing this weirdly. And then the thumb. Grandjani always said that descending arpeggios are much easier than ascending arpeggios for ease of playing, sound, articulation, and he was right. So that's what I talk to my students about in pedagogy. We spend a lot of time in the first semester examining repertoire. We spend a lot of time on just topics that they will have to encounter. How do you set up your own studio? How do you bill your students? How do you arrange your schedule? How do you know how to buy a used or a brand new harp for a student? What's the criteria? Do you know how to, I don't know, do you know how to do a whole lot of things as far as the harp is concerned? Because we can't skip over those topics and just say, oh, well, here's some books, take a look at them and tell me what you think. So this, from last week on, my students are looking at specific repertoire, specific pages in specific books. And they have to write this week, they will have to write 2 pieces for right hand second finger and 2 pieces for left hand second finger. Now, you're not going to get the student to move off of F in the beginning. It's too hard. A 7-year-old doesn't have that kind of flexibility in the hand yet, but you're in the process of building that flexibility. So that's what we talk about. We'll go to the end of the semester doing that, getting off of the second finger, of course. They'll get to probably teaching at least 3 fingers. I have a wonderful list of things that I formulated with Lucian Thompson. And basically it is, after the first year, the student will not yet have played 4 fingers. The hand, if you think of a 7-year-old, the hand simply is not equipped to do this. And what you're really trying to do is to build strength and flexibility and reliability so that when the student plays, the hand doesn't fall off the harp and they're not tense and they're not unhappy, and they can do pretty much anything you ask them to do. So that's kind of what we do. The second semester in the pedagogy class, they have to find what we lovingly refer to as a guinea pig student, and preferably not a pianist, because pianists know how to use their hands at the same time. Even though it's different, this versus this, I love the fact that they will oftentimes have a 1-line reader. So a trumpet player or a saxophone player or not a percussionist. And we don't want percussionists because they use their hands, 2 hands at the same time. They're wonderful people and they have great rhythmic skills, but no. I want the students to be challenged. So sometimes we get singers, and they, if it's a soprano, they don't read bass clef. So this is a terrible surprise, but I think it's necessary. It also helps them to learn how to teach that skill. So that's basically what my pedagogy course is for. I feel strongly, very strongly about the fact that someone who has been teaching or playing themselves and has taken a handful of lessons, maybe 6 lessons or so, and thinks, oh, this is great, I can teach the harp. Really? I don't think so. It disturbs me when I hear things like that, because I think, well, if you had taken 4 ski lessons, does that entitle you to be a ski instructor? If you've looked on at 2 surgeries, does that entitle you to be a surgeon? Really, no, it doesn't. So it requires a whole lot more experience. And the big thing for harpists is getting to know the repertoire. As I said, we keep playing and teaching the same things. And it's really important that students are excited about learning new repertoire and finding out if it works or if it doesn't work. It takes a while, but that's what it's all about. So that's kind of my take on. So the second semester, oh yes, the second semester, they had to take their guinea pig student and they teach them. They start right away on the second finger. And usually by the end of the semester, they have this student up to playing 3 fingers, 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, usually together. And at the end of the semester, we have duo day. The teacher must write an original tune or take something that's already in print. It doesn't really make any difference. It has to be at least 16 measures. They have to write a second harp part, which their student plays, and it must show all of the skills that the student has. And it's remarkably successful, I have to say. So sometimes we have a little audience for duo day, which scares everybody half to death, but it's really kind of fun. So any questions on pedagogy? Anybody?
Kathleen, can I ask from the other side of the world, how long is the semester that you're talking about in terms of length of time?
14 weeks.
Right.
Yeah. So
that's from 1 finger to 3 fingers in 14 weeks. Yeah, that's great.
But don't forget, these are students who already read music.
Yeah.
These are students who already have a certain amount of flexibility and dexterity, at least in one hand. I don't think you'll get 1 finger to 3 fingers in 14 weeks with a 7-year-old. If you did, I would think that the child was a genius or you were a very poor teacher. You really have to be sure that the skills are very well learned. And a student may say, oh, I'm sick of playing this piece. Well, then write them another one. Write them something else. Write them something that will challenge them. They will step up to the plate and learn it because they want to move on. Make sure that that student is facile in all of the technique that you are teaching them, and make sure that they can do what is necessary and are not afraid of it. Because some kids will look at a piece of music, you'll put a piece of music on the stand and say, okay, we're going to read this. We're going to read it hand separately, 8 measures, whatever. And they'll say, oh, no, I can't do it. No, I can't do it. And so why do they say that? Too much music on the page, maybe? They're afraid that they're going to make a fool of themselves. They're afraid they don't know what's going on. How are they going to do this? The one thing I love about the Thompson books, especially in the second volume, he will have a little piece. There's a piece called the Vigor of Bray, and it has some challenging things in it, including a second voice that can be learned after the original piece. And he has what he calls practice patterns. So he takes the piece and breaks it down into 2 or 3 or 4 measures. And so you play this little part of the piece starting on F, and then you start it on G, and then you start it on A, and then you start it on E. So that you get practice doing that particular part of the piece. And so I have always gone through all of the practice patterns, shown the student where this happens in the piece. And then when we go back, I can say, well, you've already learned half of this piece because of all the practice patterns. So they start to play and they think, oh yeah, I really do know this. This is great. So you want to give the student lots of confidence when they are learning, because it's really important to them. That was long-winded, Anna. I'm sorry.
Kathleen,
Yes, my friend.
can you address the issue of adult learners? Have you dealt with them? Because here you have not only a lack of experience, but also a whole lot of baggage that people are bringing to the situation. They think, well, I play the violin fabulously. Why doesn't it sound like this on the harp? And it's really hard to get people to slow down, back up,
Right.
start over. That,
Right.
have you had that pleasure in your career?
Yes, Ray, I have.
All right.
And and I always think, well, I don't play the violin fabulously, so yes, adults want to move very fast because they are at a certain point in their career and they can do their tasks. They're whizzes at the computer. They can play the piano. They can garden. They can do whatever, but they're not using their hands this way. And so I always say to my adult students, here we go. We're trying to build facility in your hands in a way that you've never used them before. It's difficult because adults think they know how this is going to go when they've never done it before. These are usually very accomplished people and people who don't have difficulties with tasks. And this is a completely different thing for them. I mean, they're going to move off of a second finger pretty fast, but then you really have to make sure that all of those tasks that you're teaching them to 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, they're really solid. And if you can't find enough pieces in whatever books you're using, you better start writing. And always keep the original, by the way. Always keep the original, because you may be someone who says, gee, these are really good, I'm going to publish these. Yeah.
So, thank you.
Did that help?
Yes, yes. Well, the other would be about teaching an adult to read bass clef, because if they're a violinist or a soprano in the church choir, and then all of a sudden, you know, you've got a whole bunch of strings down here you've got to deal with. And is there a method book that you just like some kind of commercial reading the bass clef sort of book that you have
No.
dealt with? Oh,
I haven't. I think you're going to get a lot out of the Thompson Volume 2. What I usually do is I have the student, you know, we just make up these worksheets where they either have to identify the note in that clef or write the note in a clef when I've given them the letter name, and not necessarily write it in 1 octave. They have to write it in 2 octaves. So they need to drill, drill, drill. And it's hard for them because, again, they have many skills. They already read the treble clef, but the bass clef is la mystère. So, so you have to encourage them and make sure that they're putting in the time in the bass clef. Write some bass clef pieces, and then they can play them in the right hand only when they learn all the notes in the bass clef. You have to make them understand that they are moving forward, even though they think they're going backwards or standing still.
good. Thank you.
Anytime. Hi, Fran. Anybody else?
So there's a question on here from Charlotte, and she asks, how do you approach rhythm in the first semester? Do you just use straight quarter notes on your 1, 2, 3 or 3, 2, 1 finger patterns?
In the first semester, I think there are a couple of answers to this. If your student is reasonably challenged by quarter notes, then you keep them there. But most students will move on. They get quarter notes down, and they're raring to go. They want to play something else. So then you move on. But the trick is, and I don't care if it's an adult or a student, a child, or even a teenager who has a little rhythm problem. I believe in the clapping, singing, walking, marching. It's fantastic. If a student has the rhythm in their body, they will play the rhythm correctly. So you can play the harp and have the student walk the rhythm or clap the rhythm or sing. Most kids will tell you, I don't sing. Well, I say to them, well, in my studio, we do sing. So we're going to sing, we're going to match pitches, and I'm going to sing with you, and you're going to sing with me, and we're going to have a wonderful time. But once a student internalizes the rhythm, then you won't have any trouble with it ever again. So, yeah. Did that answer the question, Anna? I'm sorry.
That question was from Charlotte, who has no audio on her computer, no microphone on her computer. So I guess we'll just wait and see what she puts into the chat. But that sounded like a pretty good answer.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I have a quick question. What do you think about teaching by rote, or do you always teach note reading to start out with?
I don't teach by rote. I don't find that it's a good idea for me. I know in the first, I think it's in the first Thompson volume, he's got one little piece that you teach by rote because it has ledger lines in the right hand. No, unless you have someone who really needs some pitch matching. Can they sing that before they play it? Can they reproduce it just watching you? I'm not sure that that's a good idea. If you're trying to build a facile independent player, then rote teaching to me is a little silly. You can tell I'm not a Suzuki teacher.
I was going to ask, what do you think of the Suzuki method? But you don't have to answer that. We know.
Kids have come to me in college who started out with Suzuki, and they're fine. They eventually kind of got out of it. They just graduated out of it or did whatever. But I have also known students who got into their teenage years and couldn't read, and then just quit the harp because they couldn't read. And they could play much faster, better. They could learn easier, but they couldn't read. You know, what's the point of that? Put a book in their lap and they have no clue as to what they're doing. So no, I don't. That's just me.
And along that line, if you have kids who have a hard time tracking, going back and forth between the music and their hand, how do you handle that situation?
Their stand is in the wrong place. I have had students come, and here they are seated at the harp, and the stand is all the way over here, and they're going like this. And I'm thinking, hello. Now, you have to look at your music, look back at the harp, and look at a conductor. No. This is never going to work. So you have to make sure that the stand is close to the harp with the three-footed stands, the big metal Manhasset stands. One of those feet goes underneath the harp between the D pedal and the column, and make sure the desk is angled so they can see the music, and then get them out of the habit of doing this and not moving their head and moving their eyes. A lot of kids just do this because somebody plopped the stand down there and that's what they do. I have a student now, and I saw her do this in studio class last week, and we've talked about this. And she was, back and forth. I said, aren't you dizzy? She said, yeah, a little. Well, okay, that's the reason. So, so pay lots of attention to where the stand is. Pay lots of attention to what height, at the height at which they are seated. Oh boy, I have seen some real doozies. Little kids, if they're really little, you need to support, and they're playing, let's say, a troubadour or some kind of a lever harp. You need to support their feet, because otherwise they're sitting on a chair and their little legs are dangling like this, and they're not balanced. They're doing this and holding on for dear life. So make sure that their feet are on some kind of a footstool, or I used to save phone books because I could put them together with duct tape and then add a phone book or take away a phone book when the child started to grow. But you can also use milk crates, the plastic crates you can get in Pottery Barn or wherever it is you get them, the dollar store. And those are great because all of a sudden the student is really, really balanced well. They're sitting up straight. For little kids, truly when their feet are balanced, their knees are ever so slightly lower than their hips. And they're playing a lever harp that hopefully does not swamp them or they are too big for it. Their shoulders should cover anywhere from 1/2 to 3/4 of the upper hole. I watched someone play this weekend who was a very tall young woman. She was an advanced player who was seated so high at the harp that she was hunched over like this and her head came forward like she was a turtle. And I thought, oh my, you're going to have head and neck problems in the next 1.5 years that are really, really not going to be fun. So I have my freshmen this year. One girl is extremely tall. She was sitting too high. One girl is tiny, very slender, very minute, and she was sitting too low. So we got them all balanced out. And so you have to make sure that they have an adjustable bench at home. a lot of the kids come to school with those X benches, you know, the ones that are like this, that only have certain levels into which you can put them. None of those levels ever work. If you have that kind of a bench, go to a yard sale and get what I call a twirly whirly, a Victorian piano stool that goes around and around and around and around, and you can get the student to a proper height. Write down the proper height in their lesson book, and you never have a problem. My students come to their lessons with their tape measure to make sure that that bench is at the right height. But then you have a fighting chance of teaching a student who is really well balanced and can see the harp where they need to see it. They can see the hands. They can play on a straight diagonal line up and down the harp, and they're ready to go. That was very long. I'm sorry.
Where should the eyes be on the harp, you know, whether it's a lever harp or pedal harp, when they're sitting at the proper height? What's the objective we should look for?
Yes, I've had an awful lot of students come to me and say, oh, well, I can look and I can see a second octave C. That doesn't make any difference to me. They could be sitting above it. They could be sitting below it. It has nothing to do with where your eyes are. It's what kind of body type you have. If you have a student who has a short torso but longer legs, they are going to need to sit a little bit higher than the quote unquote normal student, to get their body up the harp so that they are in the proper position. But they're never going to be seated more than 3/4 covering the top hole. The opposite is if you have a student who has a long torso and shorter legs, and by the way, I've never ever had a student who had an equal leg length to torso length. It's never happened. I'm hoping they'll walk into the studio one day. I don't know. I'll probably faint. So the shorter legs mean they will have to sit a teeny bit lower so that they can reach the pedals. Otherwise, they're struggling to find A, which is way out there, and D, which is way out there. And at the same time, you have to make sure that both of these body types are sitting so that their knees are lower than their hip line. And, you know, if this is my hip and these are my knees, it should be something like this. I've had kids come in like this, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness gracious, and the hips are way up in the air and the knees are way down here, and they can barely maneuver their feet and legs. So you have to find a balance. They will never be absolutely straight like this. It's impossible because they can't move their feet. So it's got to be a little bit like this. And then you'll find that you can make them comfortable. But I see every year I audition students, every year students come to the school and they are sitting incorrectly. It's horrifying to me. Did that answer your question?
Yes. Well, I play a lever harp too, so I'm not sure quite what we're looking for in terms of, because I don't have those top octaves that you're talking about, you know, with the lever harp.
How big is your lever harp?
Oh, stands to about here.
When you're standing up?
Yeah. If you wait a minute, I'll get it right here.
Oh, it's small. Yeah. Okay. So when you're seated, I think with this size of an instrument, when you're seated, you really have to feel comfortable. Oh, there it is. Yeah, very nice. What kind of a harp is it?
Hidden Valley.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I normally don't sit this high to the harp when I play it. I have a lower stool. Actually, I stand. I have the harp on a box and I play it standing because I can move around. I know better where I'm at with that.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you sit on a slightly lower stool, Just make sure that your knees are lower than your hips.
Okay.
Okay? And that
And anything about where the ear or eye or chin go or anything?
have a nice time putting them any place you want.
Okay.
I think Nancy, the most important thing is that you are comfortable.
Okay.
Okay? I like the idea of standing. It's really kind of fun. It's freeing. I mean, there are no pedals. It's great.
Yes. Well, it works on a stage anyway, but
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. People are fascinated. They just love it. It's a pretty harp, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Francis.
I have a question. Well, I have two questions.
Oh, Fran.
I know I could have 15. But two things that I would love for you to talk about that I think would be valuable are how do you teach kids these days, your students to teach kids these days how to tune? And the second thing I would love to hear you address would be students who want to play repertoire that's beyond them.
Mhm.
And that can be from like the very littlest little kids who want to play the Greensleeves arrangement they heard, or Pachelbel's Canon because that's what they heard, or Harpo Marx's something or other they heard on a movie. So I had a student like that who he wanted to be Harpo Marx, and then after 3 weeks of lessons, he decided it was harder than he thought it would be. But and then students who are older who think, oh, I can play that Malagueña even though I'm 14 and just got my new pedal harp 3 months ago. And so the tuning and the repertoire choices that are appropriate for the level of ability.
Yeah, I'll address the repertoire first. It's always challenging, always. We all have suffered from a young student coming into the lesson and mother tagging in behind saying, oh, look at this wonderful book I found. I think she should play in church on Sunday. And you're going, no, I don't think so. You're setting this kid up for failure. So it really is very hard for us because they want to play this arrangement, and you know it's going to have to come down to here. So you're either going to have to rewrite it, which is probably the situation. Give me a week. You can't sit there and scribble out notes because then they think, oh, I can't do this. I must be a failure. So beware of this. We always think of it this way. Student is in grammar school and the teacher wants them to play in the little string orchestra and hands you a piano part and says, they can play this. And you're thinking, no, I don't think so. Not this week anyway. And so you rewrite that part so that the student can play it and has a sense of accomplishment and is a part of the group. So I think that this is one of the hardest parts of our job is to pull the students back off, bring them back to reality nicely. If you can find something that will go in place of that Malagueña that they're determined to play, we're going to aim toward this piece. But here's what you're going to do now to build yourself up to play that. It's not always it's not always the easiest thing to do, but it is something that we have to do. It's hard. As for the tuning, oh my. Yes, tuning is so special. I I am all in favor of starting them out with a good tuner that they can use to tune pitch by pitch. I am a devotee of tuning in fourths, fifths, and octaves because that's the way I learned. And I know that many of the orchestral players and I know the Broadway players, it's straight up the harp on the tuner and the harp sounds great. I can't do that. It makes me crazy. But when the student gets a little bit older, I start to teach tuning. I will start with a fifth. Can they hear the fifth? Can they sing the fifth? Can they sing it back to me? Can they hear it when I detune the harp? Can they tune it up? And it's a long, slow, winding process, but it does work. And hopefully that will enable the student to feel in control as far as their instrument is concerned, and to know when they take that harp out, it's going to be tuned well because they can do this, or a parent can do this if they're too young. I will periodically have a student either bring their lever harp to me, or I will stop by the house and give it a quick tune. And they understand when a harp is out of tune. They just, in the beginning, they don't know what to do about it. But you can teach them how to do this. It's not impossible. And it's just all of what it is we do. And you might, as the student gets along a little bit, gets to be 8 or 9, just detune a little bit of the harp before they come and have them tune 3 pitches. It's hard. It's really hard. And I get I get students here at Eastman. Oh, how do you tune your harp? I just use a tuner. Oh, okay. What happens when the tuner battery dies and you don't have one in your string bag? I don't know. What happens when you put the tuner on the floor in orchestra rehearsal and you're on the edge and somebody comes along and kicks it back into the orchestra pit? What do you do then? I don't know. Do you cry? Probably. So we have to teach them how to be good at this without letting them know that we're teaching tuning. Does that make sense?
Can I say
Ray.
something?
Oh, please, please help me here, Ray.
About tuning, you said Broadway players, that would have been me way back when, and tuning straight up the scale, and maybe at some point I did that. I'm sure I did, of course. But on the other hand, I learned when I was visiting Mary Radspinner in Houston, Texas, at one of these wonderful events sponsored by where I was participating, the local Harp chapter. A young woman who was a scientist, who was an avid harp participant, she said about tuning, if you start on whatever key your instrument's going to be in, so if it's a pedal harp, are you tuning in C flat major so that all the discs are open? If it's a lever harp, are you in C major? Are you in E flat major? Are you in, it doesn't matter what key. You start on the 7th step of the scale and you tune. So in C flat, you start on the B flat and you tune all the B flats up and down the harp. And then you go to the E flat, the 5th below it. And suddenly you're setting up a resonance to hear the perfect 5th that you're talking about wanting to know. And then you go from the E flat down to the A flat down to the D flat, and you're tuning all of those steps of the scale throughout. And when you get to the end of it, you wind up tuning the subdominant note, and the whole harp is tuned, and you never had to tune a diminished 5th. They're all perfect 5ths.
Right.
And you never had to tune a diminished 5th, the B up to F thing. And I'll tell you, after you tune about 3 degrees of this, from the B flat to the E flat to the A flat, the whole harp starts to resonate with overtones that are going in every direction. It was a miracle, and I do it all the time. And that, and I don't teach my students to do it because I'm afraid they would just be so confused. And because it's an abstract concept, it really is. Why do you start on the last step of the scale to tune the scale? But just everybody go give that a try. If you're tuning a lever harp in E flat major, start on D, the leading tone in the key, and then the 5th below it, and keep going down and down. And that's what I learned from Mary Radspinner's friend in Houston, Texas. And it was wonderful.
Well, see, I have always started on A in A flat because I tune in C flat. Simply because I've always sung, and I was singing in choruses when I was in junior high school and high school, and we were always tuning up to fifths and fourths and octaves, and that's the way Granchny tuned, and it worked, and so that's what I do. I mean, everybody seems to do it their own way. I just worry about the kids who are tuning pitch by pitch by pitch, and if one of them gets a little wider, then the whole harp is out of tune.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they really need the experience of the open fifth. Absolutely.
Sure. Great.
You wouldn't have the diminished fifth if you just tuned the F to the C and the B flat to the E flat.
Well, yes, but
That's a concept.
all of the above. Oh, it goes on and on. It goes on and on. I'll shut up now.
No,
See you later.
It's fine. Yeah.
Ray, I don't know who that was. Was it Evelyn?
I don't know who Evelyn is. It was a
It
young
was
one.
Nancy Harrell, Mary.
Nancy, was it you?
Oh, the chat
No,
message.
I just wrote in the chat that the method you just described, Ray, is called Pythagorean tuning. And it's been used for centuries. It was used in medieval and Renaissance times. And
Well,
it was
I'm
even
nearly a
used,
century old, so that's great. It fits right in. Yeah.
although it wasn't used, starting on B flat and E flat. But that the idea of using fifths, fourths, and octaves, we use that in early music still. And it was used in the early 1800s in Georgian times. That was how pedal harps were tuned, in the times of Boxa. That was the type of tuning they used for early pedal harps as well.
Right. Which were tuned in E flat.
Yes.
Mary Radspinner, the woman, if you can identify her, she told me her sister was a very well-known Broadway actress. And she had been in the musical, I think it was called Twins, something like that. It was about Siamese twins. Oh, I saw it. It was crazy. And so other than that, I don't know who it was. I didn't remember her name. But if you know somebody who has a sister who was a famous Broadway actress, that's who told me. And she had a degree, she had a career in something scientific, and so she probably invented the space shuttle there in Houston or something like that. I don't know. That's who they were.
Oh, that'll be my little project to find out who that was. That's so interesting. Oh,
Well,
my.
I'd love to know. I'd love to know because it's been wonderful. All right, I'm leaving. I'm not leaving. I'm shutting out.
Well, does anyone, I have a question about hand position, but before I talk, does anyone have any other questions? Just pipe up. Okay, well, so Kathleen, if I have some adult students and they think that, okay, this is the string and this is how their hand should be, just like this, instead of like this. Well, how do you tell them what to do with their palm? So this is a string and they insist on playing like this with like they're getting ready to clean the toilet. They've got a spray bottle and they're getting ready to clean. How do you get them to relax the hand and kind of move it this way?
One thing I do is to tell the student to drop their hands by their sides. Just drop them down. So I'm going to do this, but I'm going to disappear from the screen. So their hands, their hand is down by the side, but look what happens to the hand. It naturally curls in, right? Because you can't drop your hand by your side and have it do that because you're forcing. So the hand naturally curls in, and you have them leave the hand like that, raise their hands, and raise their thumbs. And there is the position. It's right there because the palm is then facing the strings, the thumbs are up, and everybody's happy. Or we hope they're happy. Does that make sense? Because I will be teaching and I'll see a kid get really stiff and they're doing this. No. Wait. Drop your hands. Shake them out. Shake out your arms. Let's make sure that you're nice and loose. And then pick up that hand and raise your thumb. And there you are. Yeah, that may help. Anybody else?
Anybody else have, I do have another question if anyone else wants to pipe up. Okay, so my other question is, how do you teach beautiful phrasing? How do you teach them to sing their phrases as opposed to playing very precisely and mechanical? To me, I think it's more important that the musicianship should flow through and that we should hear beautiful phrasing, and that the mechanical part is just not as important as the musical part. That's just my own theory.
No, I agree with you. I'll hear a student play, all the notes are there, mechanically, everything's fine. And I say to them, depending on how old they are, I'll say, did you hear what you just played? And 99.9% of the time they'll say, no. Well, if you didn't hear what you just played, why should I be interested in listening to you? Why should anybody be interested in listening to you? Oh, they kind of think about that a little bit. So then we go back and say, okay, we talk about phrases and sentences and ideas, and then they have to sing. Where does this phrase go? Where's the half phrase? What's a half phrase? Where does this go? Oh, okay. Can you sing the tune? I'll sing it with you. Here we go. Here's the starting pitch. And we sing a half phrase. And we sing it again, and we sing it again. Now, you're going to play that half phrase just the way you sang it. Now they're listening to what it is they're doing. It staggers me that students don't hear what they're playing. If they say, no, I didn't hear what I played. Well, then why are you sitting down to any instrument? You're a curse on humanity. You should really listen to what you have to say. So encourage them to think about what it is they're doing. Their assignment for the week can be, you have to be able to sing the first 4 phrases and play them musically when you come back. And we can talk about those phrases right before you go home. You're gonna play them for me so that you know what you're doing when you get home. And if you decide that you can go further, write out your phrases, put in your phrase line, and sing it and play it. And usually the student who has had success in the lesson with that will come back doing more than you assigned them, because all of a sudden they feel empowered. I don't know if that'll help, but I've found it helps me.
No, that's really good that the phrase that you just used, that they feel empowered. That's very important for the students.
Absolutely.
If they're learning, they need to feel empowered. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else want to feel empowered?
If anyone has any, Patricia, unmute yourself.
That always helps.
Okay, often I suggest, well, on an ongoing basis, that students record themselves and listen and teach them to be their own teacher.
Absolutely. It's such a wonderful idea. Sometimes if they haven't been listening to themselves, they'll hear something that they think is just fine. But you might want to combine the recording with recording the phrase that they've now learned how to play, and then record that and listen back to it. Because then all of a sudden, oh, was I playing that phrase that way? Okay, no, I wasn't. I better go back and do it again. recording is a terrific tool, and I wish more students used it. But again, it takes time, and sometimes they feel they don't have the time, which is not good. Anybody else?
Kathleen, how long do you recommend students practice at a time? 30 minutes, an hour, 10 minutes? What, 5 times a day for 10 minutes, if you're doing specific things each time, could add up and be very advantageous, but not a lot of people have that discipline. What do you suggest?
Well, for youngsters, you have the beginner who's playing F, 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 F. It's not going to take that long
No.
to do.
Right.
It'll probably take 2 sessions of 3 or 4 minutes, and that's it. But as they get along, teenagers should definitely be practicing a minimum of an hour a day, if not 2. College students, 3 hours a day. Now, I don't recommend packing those 3 hours in together. I really think they should be practicing for 25 minutes and take 5 minutes off. Walk around, shake out your hands, get a glass of water. Think about what it is you're doing and go back to the harp. You can get more done in 50 minutes than you can in 60 minutes blasting straight on through. Also, the students, when they're a little bit older, not too much, 8, 9, 10, what do they want to accomplish in this practice time? And you can help them by writing in their lesson book and saying, your aim is to do what in your practice time? And so they can very easily plot that out and do the kind of practicing that you want them to do. And I always say to them when they come in the lesson, so how did you think your practicing went this week? Did you have any problems? Was there something that you didn't understand? Well, let's figure it out. And then they feel as if they're not on trial. They're going to show you what they did. And that's the most important thing to them. I mean, how many times when you're teaching youngsters, they come in the door and they don't want to talk to you. They want to run to the harp and play. I think that's just so terribly exciting, that they're eager to show you what it is they did and how they did it. So, yeah. Does that help?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, our hour is up.
I know.
And I can't see everybody, but does anyone have any last questions that they want to ask? I don't hear any.
I don't hear any either.
So I think that we are just about done here. I thank Kathleen, thank you so much.
You're more than
I
welcome.
typed up some of these notes and I learned so much. I absolutely learned so much. Thank you very, very much.
You are more than welcome. Thank you for
And
inviting me.
on behalf of everybody else, I just extend our great thanks to you. And I think on that note, if nobody has anything else to say, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting and let everybody get back to their day.
Okay. Feed my husband. Bye. Bye,
Thank
Red.
you so much. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.